The morning sun filtered through the large windows of UCSF Medical Center's plastic surgery wing, casting long shadows across the pristine hallways. In the consultation room, 34-year-old Garrett Lafever sat quietly, his left hand wrapped in sterile bandages, his world forever changed by a split second of inattention in his woodworking shop just 3 days earlier. Dr. Kim Tae-sung, known throughout the hospital as Dr. Miracle for his lightning-fast hands and seemingly impossible surgical feats, reviewed Garrett's case files with the intensity of a detective solving a complex mystery. The accident had been devastating. A table saw had completely severed Garrett's thumb, the digit responsible for 40% of his hand's functionality. For most surgeons, this would be a case of fitting a prosthetic and helping the patient adapt to a new reality. But Dr. Kim saw possibilities where others saw limitations. "Mr. Lafever," Dr. Kim said, his voice carrying both authority and compassion, "I want you to understand something very important. Your thumb isn't just a finger. It's the cornerstone of your hand's ability to function. Without it, simple tasks like signing your name, buttoning your shirt, or holding your morning coffee become monumental challenges." Garrett's wife Sarah squeezed his uninjured hand, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. As a carpenter and woodworker, Garrett's hands were his livelihood, his art, his passion. The thought of losing that seemed unbearable. Dr. Kim leaned forward, his eyes meeting Garrett's directly. "But I have a proposal that might sound unusual, even impossible. What if I told you we could give you back your thumb? Not with a prosthetic, not with a temporary solution, but with living tissue that will grow with you, age with you, and function like the thumb you lost." The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning system. Sarah looked between her husband and the doctor, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "There's a procedure," Dr. Kim continued, "where we can transplant your big toe to replace your thumb. I know it sounds radical, but the anatomy is remarkably similar. Your toe has the bone structure, the blood vessels, the nerves, and the flexibility needed to function as a thumb. It's intricate microsurgery that requires precision down to the millimeter, but I believe we can give you back not just your thumb, but your life as you knew it." This wasn't just medicine. This was artistry, hope, and human ingenuity working together to rebuild what seemed irreparably broken. If you're facing your own medical challenges or know someone who is, remember that miracles happen every day in operating rooms around the world. Subscribe to hear more stories of hope, healing, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The workshop had been Garrett's sanctuary for over 15 years. Every tool had its place, every piece of wood told a story, and every project brought him closer to the perfect balance between functionality and beauty. That Tuesday morning started like any other. The familiar scent of sawdust filling his nostrils, the weight of his safety goggles comfortable on his face, and the satisfying hum of machinery ready to transform raw lumber into something extraordinary. He was working on a custom dining table for his neighbor's anniversary, a piece that would showcase his skill in joinery and attention to detail. The cherry wood gleamed under the workshop lights as he guided it through the table saw, his movements practiced and confident from thousands of similar cuts over the years. But confidence can sometimes be dangerous. In one moment of distraction, perhaps thinking about the intricate inlay work he planned for the table's surface, Garrett's hand slipped. The saw blade, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, made contact with his left thumb before he could react. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like lightning striking directly through his nervous system. Blood sprayed across the workbench and onto the piece of cherry wood he'd been so carefully crafting. Garrett stumbled backward, clutching his injured hand against his chest, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. "Sarah! Sarah!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic and pain. His wife came running from the house, her face going pale when she saw the blood-soaked bandana he'd wrapped around his hand. The next few minutes became a blur of frantic activity. Sarah grabbed their car keys while calling 911, her hands shaking as she tried to help Garrett apply pressure to the wound. Neighbors heard the commotion and rushed over, one of them, thankfully a nurse, taking charge of the immediate first aid while they waited for the ambulance. "We need to find the thumb," the neighbor said with professional calm. "If it's intact, they might be able to reattach it." They searched the workshop floor, moving wood shavings and debris until they found it. Garrett's thumb, severed cleanly at the base, lying near the saw blade like a discarded piece of wood. Sarah carefully wrapped it in a clean cloth and placed it in a bag of ice, following the emergency dispatcher's instructions. At the hospital, The emergency room team worked quickly to stabilize Garrett and assess the damage. The thumb had been severed completely, taking with it not just bone and flesh, but the complex network of tendons, nerves, and blood vessels that made it function. The emergency physician, Dr. Rodriguez, examined the severed digit with the experienced eye of someone who'd seen many similar injuries. The damage is extensive, she explained to Garrett and Sarah once the initial treatment was complete and pain medication had taken the edge off. The thumb was severed at the metacarpophalangeal joint. That's the base where it connects to your hand. While the digit itself is in good condition thanks to your quick thinking with the ice, successful reattachment at this location is extremely difficult. The success rate is low, and even if it takes, functionality is often severely limited. Garrett felt his world crumbling. What does that mean for me? For my work? Dr. Rodriguez's expression was compassionate but realistic. Without your thumb, you'll lose about 40% of your hand's functionality. Simple tasks will become challenging, and your fine motor skills will be significantly impacted. However, there are options we need to explore. I'm going to refer you to our plastic surgery department. There's a surgeon there, Dr. Kim, who specializes in complex reconstructive procedures. If anyone can help you, it's him. As Garrett faced the devastating reality of his injury, little did he know that his journey was just beginning. Sometimes, the path to healing leads us to places we never imagined, and solutions that seem impossible become the foundation for miracles. Dr. Kim Tae-sung earned his nickname, Dr. Miracle, not through self-promotion or hospital marketing, but through the quiet accumulation of cases that other surgeons deemed impossible. Patients walked into his office carrying the weight of devastating diagnoses and walked out carrying hope. His colleagues marveled at his surgical precision, his ability to work for 18 hours straight without his hands showing the slightest tremor, and his uncanny knack for seeing solutions where others saw only problems. When Garrett's file landed on Dr. Kim's desk, he studied it with the same intensity he brought to every case. The photographs from the emergency room showed clean amputation, traumatic, yes, but clean. The severed thumb had been well preserved, though reattachment at that level carried such poor prognosis that Dr. Kim immediately began considering alternatives. Microsurgery, he murmured to his resident, Dr. Jennifer Park, as they reviewed the case together. The future of reconstructive surgery lies in our ability to work with structures measured in millimeters, to reconnect what seems impossible to reconnect. Dr. Park, brilliant in her own right, but still learning the artistry that elevated Dr. Kim's work beyond mere technical competence, leaned forward to study the imaging. The metacarpal base is intact. Good bone stock. Healthy tissue at the amputation site. But sir, even with microsurgery, reattachment at this level has a success rate of less than 30%, and even successful reattachment often results in a thumb with minimal function, Dr. Kim finished. Which is why we're not going to attempt reattachment. We're going to give Mr. La Fever something better than what he lost. This was vintage Dr. Kim, the moment when his thinking diverged from conventional wisdom and entered the realm of what seemed impossible. Dr. Park had seen it before, but it still amazed her how his mind worked, finding pathways that textbooks didn't describe and techniques that pushed the boundaries of what plastic surgery could accomplish. When Garrett and Sarah arrived for their consultation, Dr. Kim's manner was both professional and deeply human. He examined Garrett's hand with gentle thoroughness, explaining each step of his assessment in terms they could understand. The human thumb is an evolutionary marvel, he began, manipulating Garrett's remaining fingers to demonstrate their range of motion. It's what separates us from other primates in terms of our ability to manipulate tools, create art, build civilizations. When we lose a thumb, we don't just lose a digit, we lose a fundamental part of what makes us human. Sarah watched her husband's face during the examination, seeing the mixture of hope and fear that had become his constant companions since the accident. Doctor, the emergency physician said reattachment was unlikely to be successful. Are there other options? Dr. Kim set down Garrett's hand and pulled up a series of anatomical diagrams on his computer screen. There are several approaches to thumb reconstruction. We could attempt reattachment, though as you mentioned, the prognosis is poor. We could create a thumb-like structure using bone grafts and tissue from other parts of your body, though this would provide limited function. Or, he paused, pulling up a different set of images. We could give you a thumb that's anatomically nearly identical to what you lost. The images on the screen showed feet, specifically big toes. Garrett and Sarah exchanged glances, not sure they understood what Dr. Kim was suggesting. A toe-to-thumb transfer, Dr. Kim explained, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had performed this procedure successfully many times before. Your big toe is remarkably similar to your thumb in terms of bone structure, joint mechanics, and size proportions. The surgical technique involves carefully dissecting the toe with all its blood vessels, nerves, and tendons intact, then transplanting it to your hand and connecting everything under a microscope. The silence in the room was profound. Garrett stared at the anatomical diagrams, trying to process what he was hearing. I know it sounds radical, Dr. Kim continued, but this procedure has been performed successfully for decades. The functional outcomes are excellent. Patients typically regain 70 to 80% of normal thumb function. You'd be able to grip, pinch, write button clothing, and yes, return to woodworking. Sarah was the first to find her voice. What about his foot? How would losing his big toe affect him? Dr. Kim pulled up another set of images showing post-operative feet. The human foot is remarkably adaptable. The second toe gradually moves into the space left by the big toe, and patients maintain excellent balance and mobility. You'd be able to walk, run, hike, play sports, essentially all normal activities. For the first time since the accident, Garrett felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. How long would the surgery take? What's the recovery like? The surgery typically takes 8 to 12 hours, Dr. Kim replied. It's intricate microsurgery requiring connection of arteries, veins, nerves, and tendons, each no thicker than a strand of hair. Recovery is extensive, several months before you'd regain significant function, but the results can be life-changing. Dr. Kim's proposal opened a door that Garrett had thought was permanently closed. But major surgery always carries risks, and the decision ahead would require courage that went beyond the physical. The drive home from Dr. Kim's office was quiet except for the soft hum of the car's engine and the occasional sniffle from Sarah, who was processing everything they'd heard. Garrett stared out the passenger window, his bandaged hand resting in his lap, his mind spinning with possibilities and fears. "Did you ever think," Sarah finally said, breaking the silence, "that we'd be sitting here discussing whether to move your toe to your hand?" There was no humor in her voice, just the bewilderment of someone whose life had been turned upside down in a matter of days. Garrett managed a weak smile. 3 days ago, my biggest concern was getting the grain pattern right on the Morrisons' dining table. Now I'm contemplating microsurgery that sounds like science fiction. When they arrived home, their house felt different somehow. The workshop, visible through the kitchen window, stood dark and unused, a constant reminder of how quickly everything had changed. Garrett's tools hung in their designated places, waiting for hands that might never use them the same way again. That evening, their living room became an impromptu research center. Sarah had printed out everything she could find about toe-to-thumb transfers, while Garrett contacted other woodworkers through his professional network, hoping to find someone who'd experienced a similar injury. The statistics were encouraging, but not overwhelming. Success rates for the surgery itself were high, over 90% when performed by experienced microsurgeons. But success, in medical terms, didn't always translate to return to previous life, in practical terms. Some patients regained excellent function, while others found themselves limited in ways they hadn't anticipated. Dr. Kim had given them contact information for 3 previous patients who'd agreed to speak with prospective candidates. Garrett's first call was to Marcus, a mechanic from Oakland who'd lost his thumb in an industrial accident 5 years earlier. "Best decision I ever made," Marcus said without hesitation when Garrett explained his situation. "I won't lie to you, the recovery is tough. Really tough. But I'm back to rebuilding engines, working on classic cars, doing everything I did before. Sometimes I forget which hand has the transplanted thumb until someone asks about it." The second call was to Elena, an artist who'd lost her thumb in a car accident 3 years prior. Her perspective was more nuanced. "The function came back gradually," she explained. "At 6 months, I was frustrated because I couldn't hold a paintbrush the way I used to. At a year, I was doing detailed work again, but differently than before. Now at 3 years, I paint better than I ever did. It's like learning to be an artist all over again, but with wisdom I didn't have before." The third conversation was with David, a chef who'd experienced complications during his recovery that required additional surgeries. Even he, despite the challenges, was adamant that he'd make the same choice again. "Look," David said, "any major surgery has risks. Mine didn't go perfectly, but I'm back in the kitchen creating dishes that bring people joy. That's what matters to me. The question isn't whether there might be complications. The question is whether you can live with not trying. That night, Garrett and Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of the decision pressed down on them like a physical presence in the room. I keep thinking about the Morrison's table, Garrett said quietly. It's sitting there half-finished, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to complete it. Sarah turned onto her side to face him. What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me that Dr. Kim is offering me a chance to get my life back. Not exactly the same life, but maybe something even better. The way he talked about the surgery, the confidence in his voice. I believe him when he says it can work. Then what's holding you back? Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Fear, I guess. Fear that it won't work as well as we hope. Fear of the surgery itself, 12 hours under anesthesia while someone rebuilds my hand. Fear that I'm being unrealistic about what's possible. Sarah reached over and gently touched his cheek. You know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of watching you give up on something you love before you've even tried to fight for it. The Garrett I married is someone who sees a piece of rough wood and envisions a beautiful table. This surgery is just another kind of craftsmanship, Dr. Kim's instead of yours. The next morning brought clarity that often comes after a night of wrestling with impossible decisions. Garrett called Dr. Kim's office and scheduled the surgery for the following week. I want to try, he told the scheduler. I want to try to get my life back. Dr. Kim's response, when the message was relayed to him, was characteristic of the man who'd built his reputation on believing in possibilities. Tell Mr. Lafevre that we're going to do more than try. We're going to succeed. The week leading up to surgery passed in a blur of preoperative appointments, medical clearances, and the strange mix of anxiety and anticipation that comes with approaching something life-changing. Garrett cleaned his workshop, not knowing when he'd be able to use it again, but somehow confident that he would. The night before surgery, he and Sarah sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Whatever happens, Sarah said, I'm proud of you for choosing to fight. Garrett squeezed her hand with his uninjured fingers. Tomorrow, everything changes again. Tomorrow, she agreed, everything changes again. With the decision made and surgery scheduled, Garrett faced the most challenging part of his journey, placing his future in the hands of Dr. Kim and trusting in the possibility of miracles. The preoperative floor of UCSF Medical Center hummed with quiet efficiency at 5:30 a.m. Garrett had barely slept, not from anxiety, but from a strange sense of anticipation that felt almost like Christmas morning when he was a child. Sarah held his hand as they walked through the corridors toward the surgical preparation area, her grip firm and reassuring. Dr. Kim appeared in the pre-op area with his usual confident stride, but this morning there was something different about his demeanor, an intensity that spoke to the magnitude of what lay ahead. He was accompanied by Dr. Charles Lee, the orthopedic surgeon who would collaborate on the procedure, and Dr. Park, whose role would be crucial during the lengthy operation. Good morning, Garrett, Dr. Kim said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. How are you feeling? Ready, Garrett replied, and he meant it. I've been thinking about this moment for a week, and I'm ready to get started. Dr. Kim smiled. That's exactly what I want to hear. Today's surgery will take approximately 10 to 12 hours. Dr. Lee and I will work together. He'll handle the orthopedic aspects while I focus on the microsurgery. Dr. Park will assist throughout, and we have a full team of specialized nurses who've done this procedure with me many times. Sarah leaned forward. What's the most challenging part? The vascular connections, Dr. Lee answered. We'll be connecting arteries and veins that are less than 2 millimeters in diameter. Each connection must be perfect. Even a small leak or narrowing can compromise the entire transfer. That's where Dr. Kim's reputation for precision becomes invaluable. Dr. Kim nodded. The surgery has several phases. First, we'll harvest the toe, carefully preserving all the blood vessels, nerves, and tendons. Simultaneously, we'll prepare the thumb site on your hand. Then comes the transplantation and connection phase. This is where the microsurgery becomes critical. Finally, we'll secure everything and ensure proper blood flow. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Patricia Wong, joined their group. Garrett, you'll be under general anesthesia for the entire procedure. We'll monitor you continuously, and I want you to know that our team has extensive experience with lengthy surgeries like this one. You'll be in excellent hands. As the preoperative medications began to take effect, Garrett felt a floating sensation that seemed to lift the weight of worry from his shoulders. Sarah kissed his forehead, whispering words of love and encouragement that he would carry into unconsciousness. "See you on the other side," he murmured, and then the world faded to peaceful darkness. In operating room 7, the surgical team moved with choreographed precision. Dr. Kim stood at the microscope, adjusting the magnification and lighting to optimal settings. The OR had been prepared specifically for microsurgery. Specialized instruments lay arranged in perfect order, each one designed for work measured in millimeters. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Kim announced to his team, "today we rebuild a life. Every movement, every suture, every connection we make will determine whether Garrett Law Fever returns to the workshop he loves. Let's begin." The first phase involved harvesting the toe. Using a surgical microscope that magnified the operative field 20 times, Dr. Kim began the delicate process of identifying and isolating each structure that would need to be transferred. The great toe's anatomy was remarkably complex. 2 arteries, multiple veins, 3 nerves, and several tendons, all of which needed to be preserved with millimeter precision. "Arterial anatomy looks perfect," Dr. Kim reported as he worked. "Good caliber vessels, excellent tissue quality. Dr. Park, can you confirm the venous drainage pattern?" Dr. Park, working at her own microscope, carefully traced the veins that would drain blood from the transplanted digit. 2 primary veins, both excellent size match for the recipient site. No anomalous patterns. Meanwhile, Dr. Lee prepared the hand, cleaning away damaged tissue and identifying the structures that would receive the transplanted toe. The thumb's original anatomy had been traumatically disrupted, but the base provided good bone stock and healthy tissue for attachment. "Hand preparation complete," Dr. Lee announced after 2 hours of careful work. "Recipient vessels are in excellent condition. Bone surfaces prepared for optimal fusion." The most critical phase began as the harvested toe was positioned in place of the missing thumb. Under the microscope, Dr. Kim began the painstaking process of connecting structures that most people never think about, but which enable the miraculous dexterity of the human hand. "First, arterial anastomosis," he announced, beginning to connect blood vessels with sutures finer than human hair. Each stitch had to be perfectly placed, perfectly tensioned, and perfectly sealed. A single mistake could compromise blood flow and doom the transplant to failure. Hours passed in intense concentration. Dr. Kim's hands moved with mechanical precision, never trembling despite the length of the procedure. Around him, the surgical team maintained perfect support, adjusting lighting, providing instruments, monitoring the patient's condition, all while respecting the intense focus required for microsurgery. "Blood flow confirmed," came the exciting announcement after the vascular connections were complete. The transplanted toe, now functioning as a thumb, began to pink up as blood circulated through the newly connected vessels. But the surgery was far from over. Nerves needed to be connected to restore sensation, tendons needed to be repaired to enable movement, and bone needed to be secured for stability. Each connection represented another step toward restoring the complex symphony of structures that make the human hand the remarkable tool it is. "Final suture placed," Dr. Kim announced as the 12-hour marathon neared its end. "Excellent blood flow, good tissue color, secure bony fixation. I believe we've given Mr. Law Fever his life back." As Garrett slept through the most important 12 hours of his medical journey, Dr. Kim and his team worked to rebuild not just a hand, but a future filled with possibility. Consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from the depths of a very deep pool. Garrett became aware of sensations gradually: the soft beeping of monitors, the antiseptic smell of the recovery room, and most notably, a strange feeling in his left hand that he couldn't quite identify. His eyes fluttered open to see Sarah's face hovering over him, her expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "How do you feel?" Garrett tried to speak, but found his throat dry from the breathing tube. A nurse appeared with iced chips, and after a few moments, he managed to croak out the question that had been forming in his mind. "Did it work?" Dr. Kim appeared beside the bed, his surgical scrubs replaced with a white coat, but his eyes carrying the satisfied look of someone who had just completed a masterpiece. "The surgery was successful," he said with quiet confidence. "Better than successful, actually. The toe transferred beautifully, all vascular connections are functioning perfectly, and your new thumb already has good color and blood flow. The real work begins now, though, healing and rehabilitation. Garrett tried to lift his left hand to look at it, but found it was immobilized in a complex dressing that extended from his fingertips to halfway up his forearm. "I can't see it," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "That's intentional," Dr. Kim explained patiently. "For the next 2 weeks, we need to keep everything absolutely still to allow the delicate connections to heal. Think of it like setting concrete. Movement too early can disrupt the process we worked so hard to complete." Dr. Park joined them, carrying a tablet with post-operative instructions. "The next few weeks are critical. We'll be monitoring you closely for any signs of complications, changes in color, temperature, or circulation that might indicate problems with the blood flow." The first week post-surgery was a test of patience unlike anything Garrett had experienced. Confined to bed rest with his hand elevated, he felt helpless in a way that went beyond the physical limitations. Sarah took leave from her job to stay with him, helping with basic tasks that he'd always taken for granted. "This is harder than I expected," he admitted on day 4, his voice carrying the frustration of someone accustomed to independence. Dr. Kim made daily rounds, checking the surgical site with the intensity of a watchmaker examining a delicate mechanism. Each visit brought reassuring news. The transplant was healing beautifully, blood flow remained excellent, and there were no signs of rejection or infection. "Your body is accepting the transplant exceptionally well," he told Garrett during a week 1 visit. "The tissues are integrating, and I'm very pleased with the progress. Next week, we'll remove some of the dressings and you'll get your first look at your new thumb." That first glimpse was emotional in ways Garrett hadn't anticipated. The toe, now positioned where his thumb had been, looked alien yet familiar at the same time. It was clearly not the thumb he'd been born with, but it was undeniably his pink, warm, and showing the early signs of healing. "It looks like a thumb," Sarah said wonderingly, leaning in for a closer look. "I mean, I know it's your toe, but in that position, with those proportions, it really looks like it belongs there." Dr. Kim nodded with satisfaction. "The anatomy is remarkably similar. As the swelling goes down and the tissues settle into their new position, it will look even more natural." The next phase of recovery involved gentle physical therapy designed to prevent stiffness while still protecting the healing surgical sites. Garrett met with Maria Santos, a hand therapist who specialized in post-surgical rehabilitation. "We're going to take this very slowly," Maria explained during their first session. "Your brain needs to learn to control your new thumb, and your new thumb needs to learn to respond to your brain's commands. It's like learning to play a musical instrument. It requires patience, practice, and time." The early therapy sessions were exercises in humility. Simple movements that Garrett had performed unconsciously for 34 years now required intense concentration and effort. Touching his new thumb to his index finger, a movement that seemed trivially simple, felt clumsy and uncertain. "I feel like I'm trying to write with my non-dominant hand," he told Maria during week 3 of rehabilitation. "That's exactly what you're doing," she replied. "You're building new neural pathways, creating new muscle memory. Every person who goes through this process experiences the same frustration, and every person who sticks with it sees remarkable improvement." By week 6, small victories began to accumulate. Garrett could pick up a pencil, though his grip was awkward. He could button his shirt, though it took much longer than before. Most importantly, he could feel sensation returning to his new thumb. Not just pressure and temperature, but the fine tactile sensation that would eventually allow him to judge texture, grain, and surface finish in his woodworking. Dr. Kim monitored these developments with the satisfaction of an artist watching his creation come to life. "The nerve regeneration is proceeding exactly as we hoped," he told Garrett during a 2-month follow-up visit. "Sensation will continue to improve for up to 2 years, but you're already ahead of where most patients are at this stage." The psychological aspect of recovery proved as challenging as the physical rehabilitation. Garrett struggled with impatience, wondering if he would ever regain the fine motor skills that had defined his professional identity. Some days, the progress seemed impossibly slow. "I keep thinking about the Morrisons' table," he told Sarah one evening as they sat in their living room, the dark workshop visible through the window. "It's been sitting there for months, half finished. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to complete it." Sarah took his hand, both of them, the healed one and the healing one. "You know what I think? I think when you do finish that table, it's going to be the most beautiful piece you've ever made. Not because your technique will be better, but because it will represent something more than craftsmanship. It will represent courage, determination, and the refusal to give up on what you love. As Garrett's new thumb slowly integrated into his life, he began to understand that healing involved more than just surgical success. It required rebuilding his relationship with his own capabilities. For months post-surgery, Garrett stood at the threshold of his workshop for the first time since the accident. The space looked exactly as he'd left it. Tools in their designated places, the half-finished Morrison table covered with a protective cloth, sawdust still scattered on the floor near the table saw that had changed his life. Sarah stood beside him, understanding the significance of this moment without needing words. This wasn't just about returning to work. This was about reclaiming an identity that had been shattered along with his thumb. "Take your time," she said softly. "There's no rush." Garrett flexed his new thumb experimentally, marveling as he did every day at the strangeness and familiarity of the movement. The sensation was still returning, but he could now feel texture and pressure with remarkable accuracy. Maria had been right. The neural pathways were rebuilding themselves, creating new connections between mind and flesh. He walked slowly around the workshop, touching familiar tools, running his fingers along wood surfaces, reacquainting himself with the space that had been his sanctuary for so many years. When he reached the covered table, he paused, then slowly pulled away the cloth. The Morrisons' dining table sat there like a question mark, its partially completed surface a testament to the moment when everything changed. The cherrywood had aged slightly over the months, developing a patina that actually enhanced its beauty. "I remember exactly what I was planning to do next," Garrett said, his voice carrying a mixture of nostalgia and determination. The mortise and tenon joints for the base, then the hand-carved details on the legs. Dr. Kim had cleared him for light woodworking activities, with the caveat that he should build up to more demanding tasks gradually. "Think of it like athletic training," the surgeon had said. "You wouldn't run a marathon on your first day back from an injury. Your hand needs to rebuild its strength and coordination." Garrett started with simple tasks, measuring, marking, handling wood without cutting or shaping. His grip felt different but secure. The new thumb provided opposition and fine control, though the movements required more conscious thought than before the surgery. Maria had prepared him for this phase of recovery. "You'll need to relearn techniques you've known for years," she'd explained. "Your brain has to create new motor patterns, new muscle memories. Be patient with yourself." The first cut with a handsaw was a moment of profound significance. Garrett positioned the blade carefully, his new thumb providing the opposition needed for precise control. The stroke was smooth, controlled, exactly what he'd hoped for but hadn't dared to expect. "It works," he said quietly, then louder with growing excitement. "It actually works." Over the following weeks, Garrett gradually expanded his activities. Chiseling, planing, sanding. Each technique had to be relearned, but came back more quickly than he'd feared. His new thumb was slightly shorter than the original, and the grip felt different, but the functionality was remarkable. The most challenging test came when he decided to complete the Morrisons' table. The intricate joinery required precision that would test every aspect of his recovered abilities. Working on the mortise and tenon joints that would connect the table's base, Garrett found himself marveling at his new thumb's capabilities. "The grip strength is actually better than I expected," he told Sarah one evening, showing her the progress on the table. "And the fine motor control keeps improving. Watch this." He picked up a pencil and wrote his name with smooth, controlled strokes. 6 months earlier, this simple task had been impossibly difficult. Dr. Kim, during a follow-up visit, examined Garrett's hand with the satisfaction of seeing his surgical artistry translated into functional reality. "Your range of motion is excellent," he noted, watching Garrett demonstrate various grips and movements. "Sensation continues to improve, and the strength is remarkable for this stage of recovery. How does it feel to be back in your workshop?" "Like coming home," Garrett replied. "Different than before, but definitely home." The surgeon nodded. "That's exactly what we were hoping to achieve. You've regained not just function, but the ability to pursue your passion." When Garrett finally completed the Morrisons' dining table 3 weeks later, it was with a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond finishing a piece of furniture. Each cut, each joint, each carefully shaped detail represented a victory over the limitations that had threatened to define his post-accident life. The table was beautiful, perhaps more beautiful than it might have been if completed without interruption. The wood had developed character during its months of waiting, and Garrett's renewed appreciation for his craft brought extra care to every detail. "It's the most meaningful piece I've ever made," he told his neighbors when he delivered it. "Not because of the technical complexity, but because of what it represents." The Morrisons were moved to tears when they heard the story behind their table's creation. "This isn't just furniture," Mrs. Morrison said, running her hand along the smooth surface. "This is a testament to human resilience." That evening, Garrett and Sarah sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink. His left hand rested on the arm of his chair, the new thumb clearly visible, but somehow looking like it had always belonged there. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "The surgery, the long recovery, everything we went through?" Garrett flexed his thumb thoughtfully, watching it move with fluid precision. "Never. Not once. If anything, I'm grateful for the entire experience. It taught me not to take anything for granted." As Garrett mastered his craft once again, he began to understand that his journey had transformed him in ways that went beyond the physical reconstruction of his hand. 1 year after his surgery, Garrett received a call that would give new meaning to his recovery journey. Dr. Kim's office was asking if he would be willing to speak with another patient, a young violinist named Rebecca, who had lost her thumb in a climbing accident and was considering the same surgical procedure. "I remember how much it helped to talk with other patients before my surgery," Garrett told Sarah. "Of course I'll talk with her." Rebecca Chun was 26 years old, a professional violinist with the San Francisco Symphony whose world had been shattered when a climbing anchor failed during a weekend trip to Yosemite. Like Garrett, she faced the devastating reality that her injury threatened not just her livelihood, but her identity as an artist. When they met in Dr. Kim's office, Garrett could see his own pre-surgery fears reflected in Rebecca's eyes. The uncertainty, the desperate hope, and the fear of making the wrong decision. "The hardest part for me," Rebecca said, "is imagining that I'll ever be able to play at the level I did before. The violin requires such precise finger placement, such delicate control." Garrett nodded understandingly. "I had the same fears about woodworking. The precision required, the fine motor skills. I couldn't imagine how a transplanted toe could ever provide that level of control." He held up his left hand, demonstrating the fluid movement of his reconstructed thumb. "But here's what I've learned. It's not about getting back exactly what you had. It's about adapting, evolving, becoming something new, and maybe even better." Rebecca studied his hand with the intense focus of someone whose livelihood depended on understanding precise movement. "Does it feel normal? When you're working, do you think about it being different?" "Sometimes," Garrett replied honestly. "But mostly it just feels like my hand." The brain is remarkably adaptable. After a year of rehabilitation and practice, the new neural pathways feel as natural as the old ones. Dr. Kim joined their conversation, bringing X-rays and photographs documenting Garrett's recovery progress. "Rebecca, I want you to see something remarkable," he said, displaying before and after images. "This is what functional reconstruction can achieve when combined with dedicated rehabilitation." The images told Garrett's story in medical terms. The precise surgical connections, the bone integration, the tissue healing that had restored function to a hand that many would have considered permanently disabled. "The success we've achieved with Garrett represents the current state of the art in reconstructive microsurgery," Dr. Kim explained. "But success in the operating room is only the beginning. The real achievement is what patients do with the function we restore." Rebecca's surgery was scheduled for the following month, and Garrett found himself in the unusual position of being a mentor to someone facing the same journey he'd completed. They exchanged contact information, and he promised to be available throughout her recovery process. On the day of Rebecca's surgery, Garrett and Sarah found themselves back in the familiar waiting area of UCSF's surgical floor, this time as supporters rather than patients. The 12-hour surgery felt different from this perspective. Less personal terror, more confident anticipation. When Dr. Kim emerged from the operating room with his characteristic expression of satisfied accomplishment, Garrett felt a vicarious thrill of success. "Excellent outcome," the surgeon reported. "Perhaps even better than we achieved with you, Garrett." Rebecca's anatomy was ideal for the procedure, and everything connected beautifully. Over the following months, Garrett guided Rebecca through the same challenging rehabilitation process he'd experienced. He shared the frustrations, celebrated the small victories, and provided the kind of understanding that only comes from personal experience. "Some days I want to quit," Rebecca confided during one of their regular check-ins. The violin feels so foreign in my hands. I remember that feeling, Garrett replied. I thought I'd never be able to complete a complex project again. But one day, you'll pick up your violin and realize that your hands remember what to do. Not exactly the same way as before, but in a new way that's uniquely yours. 6 months after her surgery, Rebecca performed her first professional concert since the accident. Garrett and Sarah were in the audience, watching with the pride of people who had witnessed a small miracle unfold. The music that flowed from Rebecca's violin was beautiful, technically proficient, and emotionally powerful. But more than that, it represented the triumph of human determination over seemingly insurmountable obstacles. She sounds incredible, Sarah whispered during the performance. Garrett nodded, his eyes fixed on Rebecca's left hand as it moved with fluid precision across the violin's fingerboard. She's better than she was before. Not just technically, but artistically. She's playing with the depth that only comes from understanding what it means to lose and regain something precious. After the concert, Rebecca found them in the lobby, her eyes bright with tears of joy and accomplishment. I couldn't have done this without your encouragement, she said to Garrett. Knowing that someone else had made this journey successfully, it made all the difference. Dr. Kim, who had also attended the concert, joined their celebration. This is why I do what I do, he said simply. Not just to restore function, but to enable people to pursue their dreams again. Through helping Rebecca, Garrett discovered that his journey had equipped him not just with a reconstructed thumb, but with the ability to guide others toward their own miracles. 2 years after the accident that changed everything, Garrett Lafever stood in his workshop putting the finishing touches on a custom violin case, his first collaborative project with Rebecca Chin. The case would house the instrument she'd used for her triumphant return to professional performance, creating a beautiful circle of craftsmanship and recovery. His left hand moved with confident precision as he applied the final coat of varnish, the reconstructed thumb providing the opposition and fine control that made such delicate work possible. To any observer, it would be difficult to identify which thumb had been transplanted. Both moved with fluid naturalness. Both contributed to the remarkable dexterity that defined his craft. Dr. Kim stopped by the workshop that afternoon, as he occasionally did when checking on his success stories. He watched Garrett work with the satisfaction of an artist admiring a masterpiece. Not just the surgical reconstruction he'd performed, but the life that had been rebuilt around it. How does it feel? The surgeon asked, a question he'd posed many times during the recovery process. Like myself, Garrett replied, not pausing in his work. Different than before, but completely myself. Sarah emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, her routine gesture of support now carried out without the undercurrent of worry that had characterized the early months of recovery. The workshop had returned to being a place of creation rather than a symbol of loss. Dr. Kim, she said with genuine warmth, we can never thank you enough for giving us our lives back. The surgeon shook his head gently. I provided the technical expertise, but Garrett did the real work. The courage to undergo surgery, the dedication to rehabilitation, the refusal to accept limitations, that came from within. Rebecca called that evening with news that the San Francisco Symphony had offered her a recording contract, recognition of the artistic growth that had emerged from her recovery journey. Garrett felt the deep satisfaction that comes from helping someone else achieve their dreams. I've been thinking, Rebecca said during the call, about starting a support group for musicians who've experienced hand injuries. Would you be interested in helping? The idea resonated immediately with Garrett's growing sense that his experience had value beyond his personal recovery. Absolutely. I think there are a lot of people who could benefit from hearing our stories. That night, as he and Sarah sat on their front porch in the familiar ritual that had sustained them through the most challenging year of their lives, Garrett reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. You know what I've learned? He said, watching the sunset paint the sky in its eternal palette of orange and pink. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing that happens to you. His reconstructed thumb traced idle patterns on the arm of his chair, a gesture so natural that it would be impossible to identify it as the product of surgical intervention. The accident taught me not to take anything for granted, he continued. The surgery taught me that incredible things are possible when you refuse to accept limitations. The recovery taught me that healing involves the mind and spirit as much as the body. And helping Rebecca taught me that sharing our struggles can multiply our strength. Sarah reached over and took his hand, both of them, feeling the warmth and life that flowed through fingers that had been rebuilt from impossible circumstances. "What's next?" she asked, the question carrying none of the uncertainty that had characterized their conversations 2 years earlier. Garrett smiled, his future as clear as the smooth finish on the violin case waiting in his workshop. "Next, we keep creating. We keep helping others. We keep believing in miracles." Dr. Kim, driving home from his visit, reflected on the hundreds of procedures he'd performed during his career. Some had been technically more challenging, others had received more recognition in medical journals, but few had provided the deep satisfaction of seeing a patient not just recover, but thrive in ways that exceeded their pre-injury potential. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, new opportunities to restore what seemed irreparably broken. But tonight, he carried the satisfaction of knowing that somewhere in the hills overlooking San Francisco, two artists, a woodworker and a violinist, were pursuing their crafts with hands that bore testament to the miracle of reconstructive surgery and the indomitable nature of the human spirit. The message was clear for anyone facing seemingly impossible medical challenges. Miracles happen not just in operating rooms, but in the daily courage to believe that tomorrow can be better than today, that loss can become transformation, and that the end of one story can become the beginning of something even more beautiful. In workshops and concert halls, in examination rooms and rehabilitation centers, the story continues, one patient, one surgeon, one miracle at a time.